You have reached the Center Stage series at Tennessee Tech University, and tonight our guest is going to be Peter Connors. Peter is very hard to introduce because he's done so many things, and he does so many things. He's a writer, an editor, a Grateful Dead enthusiast, and he's written in many different forms. He's going to be reading from a couple of different things he's done tonight, but you'll see he goes all over the place. One of the things that he's going to be reading from is his memoir, Growing Up Dead. When he was 15 years old, he started on the road, going to Grateful Dead shows and living the life inspired by a quote by Lawrence Ferlinghetti, recently passed poet. The first thing a poet has to do is to live that type of life which doesn't compromise himself. And Peter has done that ever since. The second thing he's going to be reading from is a book called The White Hand Society, which is a history of the friendship and psychedelic partnership of beat poet Allen Ginsberg and cosmic traveler Timothy Leary. I've read that book, and I've read both those books, and it's a really fun book, and it's really I think it's something that Peter kind of anticipated, a new interest in hallucinogens in a positive way. With that book 10 years ago. And then finally, he's going to read from his newest book, the cover of which you see. I always mix up left and right. Yes, there it is right there. Over there. Grateful Dead or Cornell 77, about a Grateful Dead show at Barton Hall in 1977, which Grateful Dead enthusiasts think of as the greatest Grateful Dead show. And it's funny because I picked the book up thinking, why would I be reading a book about a Grateful Dead show, that happened, 35 years ago, or no, well, longer than that now. Anyway, I can't do math on the fly, but that happened in 1977. And the reason is, we've got Spotify now. We can hear it ourselves, and we can hear all the tracks that he's talking about. And it's a great companion to that listening experience. And shows again the talent and range of Peter Connors, who's also a prose poet. And I hope we'll have time for him to read some of that for us tonight too. So without further ado, let me bring on Peter Connors.
Hey, thanks for having me, Ted.
Absolutely.
And thank you, Andrew Smith, too, who is backstage pushing levers and so forth. So I think I'm going to just jump in here and read some Growing Up Dead to get us started. And the passage I picked, it's actually chapter 11, so it's a little bit into the book. It's called In and Out of the Garden He Goes. And I think there's maybe some Tennessee Tech writing students in here as well. So maybe more for them, I'll say that this was written in the second person, which is threaded throughout the book. So instead of saying I do this and I do that, it's you do this, you do that, which I did for a few different reasons, but I think the most immediate one is it sort of sets up a more poetic rhythm and a chance to play with some more poetic imagery, which can be tough to capture when you're talking about an experience like going to a Grateful Dead concert. And in this case, actually coming out of the Grateful Dead concert, pretty amped up from what just happened. So this is In and Out of the Garden He Goes from Growing Up Dead. The encore with U.S. Blues, so there's no energy bog. U.S. Blues is one of the Dead's most straightforward, up-tempo rockers. Most encores, Black Muddy River, aka Black Cruddy River, It's All Over Now, Baby Blue, aka It's All Over Now, Grab Your Shoes, slow everything down and prepare you for the after-show transition. You gather the possessions you've tossed into the corner during the show, extra clothes, backpacks, shoes, etc., and sway slowly in place as the band winds down. Or else you start winding your way through the hallways toward the best exit, perhaps gathering friends you've misplaced along the way. You are seldom intrepid enough to actually leave the Coliseum until the band has absolutely left the stage, even though you know this is the last song and you'd just as soon head out into the night. Why? Because you never know, that's why. And if, God forbid, the Dead busted out some crazy double encore acoustic ripple St. Stephen Ken Kesey rap and you missed it to get out to the parking lot, you would quite literally never forgive yourself. But the encore energy flow is different tonight. Tonight they encore with US Blues. The hallways are electric with dancers spinning, twirling, and jigging. You are not only about to head out into the parking lot, but you're heading to the next show, the next state, traveling down the treacherous throughways of America toward your next encounter with the band. Not everyone will make it. Deadheads will get busted and locked up along the way. Families will get separated. Some might have to leave tour and go back to a job, school, family, that insidious real world of America. The Dead know this. They know we're braving the wilds after this, and they know how it is. Red and white, blue suede shoes. You can call this song the United States Blues. In other words, be safe out there, children. This space only lasts so long, and then the authorities close back in. So carry this energy with you back into the parking lot, into the world, down the hallway. Whatever you do, don't get busted, and we'll see you at the next stop. You're still flying, spinning, grinning, and dancing when the band leaves the stage. Your family stayed together tonight. No one split off with other friends. Everyone stayed together to dance the whole show. Everyone smoked together during set break. No one went on a bum trip. No one was weirded out. Shasta danced during drums while you and Harry riffed on people walking around the hallways, goofing, playing with reality, gasping at how easy it is to bend the world into shapes and how slowly it springs back to its original prefabricated forms. Bart and Sissy are in deep communion on their trip. Other friends have come and gone throughout the night, eventually dancing their way down the hallway into their own personal adventure. But now it's US Blues, back-to-back Chicken Shack, son of a gun, better change your act. Jerry nails the change your act hard, mimicking every scolding voice you've heard your entire life and putting everybody onto the joke. Here's what you're going up against, and no one here is changing their act, especially not Jerry. If anything, we're all in on the act, partners in this victimless crime. You are all together when Bobby mumbles, "Thank you all, good night." The crowd is wild with excitement from the rocking closer, and Deadhead eyes are shiny and bugged out as they filter out of the Coliseum into the hallways toward the glass doors. Once again, Shasta is in the lead. You are behind him, side by side with Harry, both of you still goofing on the world around you as if matter was a sight gag created solely for your entertainment. Bart has picked up some crusty old head on the way out. They are talking slowly and deeply, and you do not want to know what it's about. Sissy is chatting up a beautiful young blonde girl whose innocence was severely tweaked for the better at the show. He is laughing and throwing his head back. He is making her happy. As the Deadhead hordes form a bottleneck at the glass exit doors, the mooing begins. Moo, moo. People are goofing on the way we so quickly turn ourselves from dancing fools into mindless cattle lined up to go back into the world. Soon the hallways are filled with mooing, and the sound carries on outside as you pass the exit and are shuttled down a concrete walkway. You and Harry are messing with people now, making other barnyard sounds to complement the mooing. Chickens, a goat, a horse, a pig, until things get carried away and all sounds work equally well. Monkey, random bird calls, drum sounds, high chittering laughter. It is weird, truly weird, and you are in on the joke and laughing hard as people around you either get it or don't. It doesn't matter. You are with family, and you get it. You all stand around the bus while Shasta unlocks it. For some reason, you expect something miraculous to happen when the door slides open. There is no reason for it. Harry is now with Bart, and you and Sissy have for some reason decided that something wonderful, Sparkling gold treasure or an alien with kind bud might have materialized in the bus during the show. You don't tell anyone else that. Shasta ignores the fact that you're watching him unlock the door with huge, stupid grins on your faces. You look at each other and inhale deeply when the bus door slides open. There is a moment of pure wonder as you peek inside the bus, first one, then the other, and then you both fall out laughing and realizing how screwed up you truly are. You stare at each other, silent, grinning, and then stand looking at the open doorway for a few more minutes. You guys tripping? Says Bart as he blows past and into the bus. Much, finishes Harry, joining Bart inside. They have picked up veggie burritos along the way. Bart offers Sissy a bite, which he takes. Then he offers you a bite, but you can't imagine eating such a thing in your present state. Food, that is. Completely unnecessary, although it would probably be the best thing for you. You light another smoke instead. You take one last look around the parking lot as Shasta climbs into the driver's seat and Bart slams the passenger door. All around you, deadheads are making their way back to their vehicles, their sticker-covered hatchbacks, their rusty station wagons, their Frankenstein vans, their family buses. Some look lost in so striking a way that you want to immediately erase their memory from your mind. A tripped out head stumbles up to you, holding out a geode, and says, cities, before stumbling down the line. You want to help them. You want them to help themselves. Some are still dancing like the show never ended. Some are looking hard for more doses. Many look as if they've had far too many micrograms of LSD already. People are sweaty, their skin is glistening, their clothes hang off them, conforming limply to their bodies, embodying the wrung-out, blissful, exhausted nature of everyone who took the Dead Show full tilt. These people or others like them will reappear down the road a couple days from now in Pittsburgh, Ann Arbor, Cincinnati, Louisville. You hope that they find their way there safely. Come on, man, hop in, let's get going, Shasta calls, as he guns the puttering little VW engine. Bart has the passenger side window rolled down. His fuzzy arm is resting against the green paint, a woodsy Winston smoking between his fingers. Sissy is sitting on the bed, breaking up weed onto a Frisbee that's resting beside the cluttered sink. Harry is leaning back against the wall with his feet extended toward you. He is staring at you with a grin that says he can see straight through your head and he loves what you are thinking. You are wishing them peace. You are wishing everyone about to get back on the road as much peace as they can handle. Hey, Space Ranger, Sissy says, looking up from his task, get in the bus. And you do. All right, Ted, that's from Growing Up Dead. I believe he's going to come back and we're going to do a little chatting now. Welcome back from the show.
So you started doing that when you were, what, 15, you said?
Yeah, well, I went to my first concert when I was 16. It was the summer. It was the summertime. It was July 2nd in a place called Kingswood Music Theater in Canada's Wonderland. I was coming from Rochester, New York, so it wasn't too far away, but we did have to cross a border, which was one of the first adventures that happens in the book.
Does it amaze you now that you kind of gave yourself permission to do that at that age and just took off?
Yeah, I mean, just to put it in perspective, my oldest son is now 19.
Yeah.
And my next son is 17. So I have two sons who are now older than I was when I did that. And that's, a whole different sort of perspective. It is and it isn't. I mean, it's for, at that time, there was no sort of tethering to cell phones as much. And I think we had been used to a lot more freedom. It wasn't as strange, you know what I mean? It wasn't as unusual. And I also had older siblings, so they had sort of gone through and gone to concerts and things. And, we would joke that my parents were broken in by them already. I was the youngest one. So yes, I mean, in retrospect, I go like, wow, I was pretty young, but at the time it didn't feel that way.
Sure. Yeah. What do you think you'd say to yourself from those days now if you were to have that strange experience?
I'd probably say go to more shows. There were some decisions. There were some decisions that I made not to go to some for reasons of, just silly reasons that I should have gone to. So I'd go to more shows.
Yeah, yeah.
Hmm.
What is it about the Grateful Dead that not only has like grabbed you, but has grabbed so many people into this kind of experience? That the Grateful Dead has this kind of road show that no one else or did. Have this kind of road show that no one else had, and had this whole kind of uh, you know gypsy taping, kind of circus going on where everyone had these shows and they were trading them and whatnot. What do you think it was about the band that made it coalesce around them?
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's really interesting because, whether you're aware of it or not, Ted, that question brought in so many different aspects to Grateful Dead culture. And you can
Mm,
sort of pick out, one strand or another and say, well, this is a big reason why, or this is a big reason why. But, it all has to come back at some point, just starts with the music. And
yeah.
you're either grabbed by the Grateful Dead music or you're not. And there's a famous quote by Jerry Garcia that said, not everybody likes licorice, but the people who like licorice really like licorice a lot. So Deadheads were like people who really liked the licorice. But it's
Mhm.
interesting. I had a book. There's a new book on a guy named Ram Dass, who I referenced at the beginning of
Oh,
Cornell
sure.
77, who's a spiritual teacher. And he had a
Yeah.
real famous book called Be Here Now.
Yep.
And I think one of the things that, without realizing it, a lot of us picked up from going to Grateful Dead concerts and listening to the music was this idea of the moment when something really magical happens in the show that will never
Mhm.
happen again, has never happened before just that way, will never happen
Mm,
again. And for that moment, you are right there present with the band and you're all in it together. And that's
mhm.
why, for a lot of people, they're like, geez, this song goes on forever. This is like a 15-minute, single song, and then it transitions into another song. And, there's
Right.
this whole, and it goes on and on to some people's ears. But Deadheads are hearing this in like small little parts. So we don't hear a 15-minute piece of music. We hear like seconds at a time and the interactions between the musicians and what might happen in one particular moment. And that's the
Yeah.
moment when we're all right there. And it's a really, it's a very unique thing to that band. It's a unique thing to improvisatory music. And they did it in this way that brought in so many different strands of music that were very much like American born.
Right.
And so it's, there, it was really, it was a unique moment, I think. And they were just such a unique band. And there's a lot of musicians that improvise, and there's different bands that are doing things in similar veins.
Yeah.
But there's nobody who's going to quite get the what we call electric Dixieland mix, that the
Mhm.
Grateful Dead did.
Yeah. Um, to hear you talk about it now, and it kind of provides a transition to what you're going to be reading next about Allen Ginsberg and Timothy Leary. But let me just, we'll go slow into that. Because to hear you talk about it now, it really evokes the Beat Generation as well. This whole life on the road and getting out there for the experience. And for those guys, it was bebop jazz, which was also an improvisational music form. Would you care to talk about that and those connections?
Yeah, well, Ginsberg called Kerouac's writing spontaneous bop prosody.
Hmm.
And so it was, it was right in there, not only bop musical, but beyond the idea of spontaneous. It's all sort of baked in. And, the Grateful Dead were very much like born of the beats. And
Hmm.
particularly, Jerry Garcia, in particular, growing up around the Bay Area, was very much a part
Oh, of
of,
course.
I would say, the folk scene that came right out of the beatnik scene that was
Right.
all centered around North Beach. And he was, he was right in there. He was a local, and he was playing in the coffee shops he knew. And of course, later on, once things got going into the '60s a little bit more, Neil Cassidy, who was famously Dean Moriarty and On the Road, was
Yeah, sure.
a part of the Merry Pranksters, who threw parties called
Yeah.
acid tests that were the first places that the Grateful Dead played. And Ken
Wow.
Kesey was very much the next generation beat writer,
Yeah.
very much the connector between Jack Kerouac and the hippies.
Hmm.
And there was a lot of figures like that who were in that orbit. So
Yeah.
not only, are they sort of philosophically connected in that way, but really in tangible physical ways. There were actual, figures crossing over from those worlds.
Yeah, and that takes us back into what Grail Marcus calls like the old weird America, uh, uh, the America that doesn't quite make it to television, but is with the folk songs and the strange little enclaves all over the country, the huge country with all of the stuff happening that people can happen into, whether it's like the Beats in their cars going to these places or the Dead going in shows to these places. It's a real Americana kind of thing. And you started with U.S. Blues there with the Dead song, because it's kind of strangely patriotic, in a way, but not certainly not the patriotism that we're spoon fed by the guys trying to get our votes, but it's a kind of homegrown patriotism, as it were.
Yeah. No, the Grateful Dead are very much an American phenomena. And I think,
Yeah.
truly like there is a lot of that patriotic spirit,
Mhm.
and I think maybe some of it is this band coming from San Francisco, California, the West Coast, which was always the sort of manifest destiny, destination for free thinkers and so forth. And it's sort of, it's woven into the American mythos, this idea of, the intrepid adventurer. And they were intrepid musical adventurers,
Yeah.
intrepid, psychic adventurers, let's say.
Hmm.
But it's interesting because, one of the reasons that I really got pulled in to the Grateful Dead scene was the idea of discovering an alternative American history. And
Yeah.
although my books, cover different aspects and different things, if you put them all together, it's the stuff I'm most interested in that I consider my, American history. So,
Sure.
rest in peace, Lawrence Ferlinghetti, who just passed away
Yeah.
2 days ago.
Yeah.
But to me, he's like he should be on Mount Rushmore. He's an epic figure to me, and that's
Yeah.
very much like truly not only to me what is my history for America, but it's such an important part truly of America and the way that we see ourselves.
Yeah.
You don't see other countries so much people making this decision to go out and find themselves and travel around the country and have that's a
Right.
really American concept of something to do. And the Grateful Dead were tied right into that, And at the time when I started to go to see shows in the 80s, nobody was hopping freight trains and having adventures like that.
Hmm.
But I could get in a Volkswagen van with my friends and travel across the country and break down and not have money and have to get money and get tickets and meet strange people and along the way get books by the beat writers or hear
Yeah.
stories from people who were at the Be-In in San Francisco in 67 or whatever it might be. And through that, this whole alternative history of America unlocked. And that to me it's important for us to stay in touch with.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I think you're right that your books do form a kind of collage of this kind of vision of America. I'd like to hear you read from the White Hand Society. I know you were planning to do that, so
Yeah.
I'll get out of the way and let you take the stage again.
All right. So it's interesting. It just occurred to me, and it wasn't planned, but I mentioned Ram Dass a minute ago, and he was actually a part of these psychedelic experiments that Timothy Leary was conducting at Harvard. He was a key person. He was really the person who did it with Timothy Leary, but his name was Richard Alpert. And they were both psychologists at Harvard, very esteemed psychologists, accomplished in their field. And they started to do testing with psilocybin, which basically are synthetic mushrooms, magic mushrooms. They have all sorts of different names, but basically with psychedelics. And it went through different phases. And they did this on prisoners to see if they could reduce recidivism rates. So it was very much, it started as very therapeutic. And there was very intentional ways of doing these studies. And over time, the idea of getting creative people involved started to come in and studying how psychedelics work with creativity. And very soon into that phase, Allen Ginsberg came into the scene. And so there was a very interesting overlap of Allen Ginsberg, a very famous beat poet, who, among other things, sort of was a real connector and knew people in counterculture and artists and what have you all over the country, was already very famous and had been famous, for a decade at that point. And he, in turn, opened up the counterculture, opened up a lot of doors for Timothy Leary, who before them was not the Timothy Leary we came to know. He was very much a sort of, tweed-wearing Harvard professor, drinking scotch and highballs and so forth. So that's really what the book is about. The scene I'm going to share with you is when Allen Ginsberg, his very first time at Harvard at Leary's house, and the first psilocybin experiment he did with them. Leary's home at Newton Center was an unlikely spot to conduct psychedelic sessions. By purely superficial standards, it appeared to be quintessentially suburban. The three-story house sat on a hill surrounded by other houses of its ilk, with a 3-car garage, manicured lawns, and 185 stone steps that led visitors to the front door. Inside, the house was filled with beautiful woodwork and metalwork lamps spotting the end tables. Thick carpets and a staircase winding up from the spacious foyer completed the picture of wealth and leisure. This was certainly a fitting house for a Harvard professor. But Allen was there to take psychedelic mushrooms, not to attend a polite cocktail party. He was coming off a long, arduous trek through the jungles of South America. Even when he was back in New York City, Allen's apartment was more of a temporary crash pad for him and his beat friends than any sort of home in the formal sense. He was certainly dubious about the almost frivolous gaiety with which Leary and his colleagues treated their psychedelic tests. Allen had stared down the vomiter. He knew that inner exploration was no joke. Still, this was Harvard. Leary was a respected psychologist, and he seemed to know how to run a session. Either way, he had a big bottle of psilocybin pills that he was willing to share. Tim shook out a handful of pink psilocybin pills into Allen's palm. Allen swallowed them down. He had already prepared Tim about his set, and now it was time to prepare the setting. Allen and Peter followed the winding staircase up to the room Tim had assigned them. Tim had already outfitted the room with his daughter Susan's record player. Allen selected Wagner and Beethoven as the soundtrack for his trip. He put on Wagner first. Then Allen took off all his clothes, turned off the lights, and laid down in bed. Peter lay down next to him, snuggled up against Allen's side, and closed his eyes. Once they were settled, Tim left Allen and Peter alone and told them he'd be back every 15 minutes to check on them. Along with Allen, there was also a painter named Donald tripping at the house that night. Frank Barron, on his best professional behavior, was also on hand to help out. Far less experienced than Allen, Tim had given Donald a smaller dose. Donald had also brought along a friend, a Harvard anthropology student, to observe the trip. Leary liked the idea of having someone to help supervise Donald. However, he made it explicitly clear that the budding anthropologist was not to take any mushrooms. While Tim did serve as a guide to Donald throughout his trip, the presence of his friend freed him up to focus more attention on Allen. No sooner had Tim offered some guidance to Donald on his trip, which already included a renunciation of technology, materialism, and general American culture, than it was time to check on Allen again. But first, Tim greeted his daughter, Susan. Susan had been at a friend's house, and now she was headed upstairs to do her homework. Tim followed her up the winding staircase and then split off to check on Allen. Allen was tripping and in a shaky state. No doubt filled with visions of the vomiter, he felt himself choking back vomit once again. He was still flat on his back in bed with Peter resting calmly beside him. But Allen was anything but calm. He was trembling, filled with fear, fighting back paranoia, darkness, and trying not to return to the state he'd struggled with in Pucallpa. Tim leaned over the bed and peered into Allen's eyes. Allen had taken off his cracked eyeglasses, and his pupils were dilated, appearing to Tim as black liquid eyes, fawn's eyes, man's eyes. Allen asked Tim what he thought of him. Tim replied that he thought Alan was a great man and that it was good to know him. Ginsberg later wrote, Professor Leary came into my room, looked into my eyes, and said I was a great man. That determined me to make an effort to live here and now. Tim asked if Alan needed anything, but Alan said no. Tim left with the promise he'd be back again in 15 minutes. The brief visit from Leary reassured Alan. He choked back the vomit and told himself that all the figures he had been so haunted by were only ways to distract himself from his true fear, the fear of being Allen Ginsberg. Perhaps he was a great man after all. Perhaps he was capable of great things. Wagner hit a crescendo, thundering through the bedroom, and Alan spotted a flash of light through the window that reminded him of the Star of Bethlehem. He wrote, suddenly out of the window, saw image as of Bethlehem's star, heard great horns of Gotterdammerung Wagner on the phonograph I'd arranged to hear in the room, like the horns of judgment calling from the ends of the cosmos, called on all human consciousness to declare itself the end of human consciousness. Seemed as if all the world of human consciousness were waiting for a Messiah, someone to take on the responsibility of being the creative God and seize power over the universe. Milton's Lucifer flashed through my mind, Paradise Lost, a book I'd never understood before. Why Milton sided with Lucifer, the rebel in heaven. I got up out of bed and walked downstairs naked, Orlovsky following me, curious what I would do and willing to go along in case I did anything interestingly extravagant, urging me on, in fact, thank God. Leary was checking on Susan. Actually, he was scolding her that reading without proper light would damage her eyesight when he heard the patter of naked feet on the wooden floorboards in the hallway. He looked up just in time to see Peter's naked ass go undulating past the doorway. Tim told Susan that Alan and Peter were walking around the house naked. She gathered up all her things, books, hairbrush, curlers, hairpins, and went up to the third floor to wait it out. By the time Tim caught up with the naked poets downstairs, Alan was excitedly telling Frank Barron what was on his mind. I am the Messiah, Alan declared, waving a finger in the air. I've come down to preach love to the world. We're going to walk through the streets and teach people to stop hating. Tim and Frank, both professionally trained at maintaining an unflappable demeanor, despite whatever a patient might say, told Alan that his idea was a good one. Still, the budding Messiah was prepared to do something more convincing. While Tim was in basic training in Fort Eustis, Virginia, he had contracted chronic bronchitis. The bronchitis, coupled with hours of exposure to 90-millimeter artillery fire at close range, had caused Leary to go deaf in one ear. Thus, while it is not well known and seldom appeared in pictures, the ever-youthful and smiling Timothy Leary wore a hearing aid. Do you believe I'm the Messiah? Alan asked. Look, I can prove it. I'm going to cure your hearing. Take off your hearing machine. Your ears are cured. Come on, take it off. You don't need it. Tim played along. He took out his hearing aid and placed it on the desk. But Alan, one thing. What? Your glasses. You're still wearing them. Why don't you cure your own vision? Alan was momentarily startled. Of course. His own vision. Those cracked lenses were still on his face. Yes, you're right, I will. Alan took off his glasses and set them on the desk beside Tim's hearing aid. Then, one half deaf, one half blind, they proceeded to the next challenge. Come on, Alan said, squinting at the two psychologists. We're going down to the city streets to tell the people about peace and love, and then we'll get lots of great people onto a big telephone network to settle all this warfare bit. Here was a larger problem. One hard, fast rule at Leary's was that no one could leave the house while on mushrooms. Nothing would derail their experiments quicker than a wild, tripping madman wandering naked down Beacon Street. In fact, Leary had already had one such scare with Donald earlier in the night. Just before Alan had come, Bringing the holy word to the study area, the anthropology student had informed Tim that Donald was outside. Tim was chilled by the information. He scrambled onto the front porch and flicked on the 2 rows of spotlights that illuminated the front lawn and the stone steps leading down to the street. Tim started down the steps, calling out for Donald as he went. Fortunately, he found Donald halfway down the lawn. The tripping man had been waylaid by a majestic oak tree. He stood, barefoot, looking up at it appreciatively. Donald asked Tim to take off his shoes. While Tim squatted down to untie his trademark white tennis sneakers, Donald reprised his earlier rap about the danger of humankind isolating itself from nature. It seemed that Donald was on a nature trip. By the time he left him on the lawn, Tim was confident that the oak tree was a better curandero for Donald than the anthropology student. Now Alan was talking about taking his trip into the outside world too. Once again, Frank Barron reacted with cool instincts instilled by his professional training. Fine, Frank said, but why not do the telephone bit first, right here in the house? Peter was excited. Who are we going to call? Well, answered Alan, we'll call Kerouac on Long Island and Kennedy and Khrushchev and Bill Burroughs in Paris and Norman Mailer in the psycho ward in Bellevue. We'll get them all hooked up in a big cosmic electronic love talk. War is just a hang-up. We'll get the love thing flowing on the electric bell telephone network. At the time, Norman Mailer had been committed to Bellevue for stabbing his wife Adele. Burroughs had already shot and killed his wife Joan during a drunken game of William Tell in Mexico City, a crime that precipitated his flight into the jungles in search of time-traveling drugs like yahe. Ginsberg decided to start with Kerouac instead. Hello, operator, this is God. I want to talk to Kerouac. To whom do I want to talk? Kerouac. What's my name? This is God, G-O-D. Alan tried to expedite the process by giving the operator the number to call. Unfortunately, it was the number of the house where he lived as a child. He was forced to go upstairs to get his address book. He returned and got Kerouac on the phone. Take a plane up here immediately, he ordered Jack. The revolution is beginning. Gather all the dark angels of light at once. It's time to seize power over the universe and become the next consciousness. Kerouac laughed. What's the matter? Are you high? I am high and naked, and I am king of the universe. Get on a plane. It is time. But I got my mother. Bring your mother. Oh, I'm tired. Alan was growing agitated at his friend's reluctance. What do you want to do? Lay down and die, Kerouac sighed. What's the matter with you? Alan bellowed. Are you afraid? Alan hadn't spoken to his old friend with such passion in years. While Kerouac was not on Alan's current plane of thought, he was certainly amused by the conversation. Alan listened as much as he talked. Jack was undoubtedly seated in a comfortable chair beside the phone in his mother's house, drunk, melancholy. He also seemed to be agreeing with Alan's notion that everyone was God. Who else but us is it? The life force is God. Before hanging up, Alan made one last request of Jack. He made Jack promise not to die. And that is my section from White Hand Society.
Wow. That's wild. That's so wild. It makes one fall in love with Allen Ginsberg again. It's quite remarkable how the poem he's most famous for is called Howl, and it's an angry poem, and it's a desperate poem. I've seen the best minds of my generation, destroyed, starving, hysterical, naked, and just this vision of hell. And he manages somehow to resurrect himself out of that into a kind of joy, that I think, uh, this experience, the hallucinatory experience, it doesn't like give you something you're not, it evokes something that's already within you. And this is like, I think, a great moment of instance of his blossoming, the way he did in the 60s.
Yeah. Yeah. And I mean, it brings to mind too, the name beat itself, which
Sure.
had that dual thing of being beat,
Right.
sort of downtrodden, but also beatific, right?
Yeah.
Angelic. And they
Yeah.
very much like to walk those two lines between, being sort of more in the gutter and seeing these holy visions of God. And Alan and Jack certainly were, big into that. And honestly, what led me to do this book is that I was at Stanford visiting a friend who was in law school there, who was
Mhm.
actually, interestingly enough, Shasta from Growing Up Dead. Eventually went to
Sure.
Stanford Law School and became
Wow.
a lawyer and is a lawyer. So I
Yeah.
was visiting Shasta at Stanford Law School, and he got me into their library, and they have Allen Ginsberg's papers there. So I didn't have any sort of
Wow.
idea in mind other than like,
Right.
oh, cool, I have access to Allen Ginsberg's papers. And so I started signing out boxes, and they brought me stuff, and I did go through his address books. And I mean, it really was amazing. You open up his address books, and it's like, everybody you can think of, especially in
Yeah.
the New York City, artistic scene was right there. And so, and Leary obviously connected with this too. But I started then to see all this correspondence between the two of them. And I
Right.
was aware of course, Leary as a figure and Ginsberg as a figure, but I never realized not only how much they overlapped, but how important in particular Ginsberg was to Leary's connecting into the counterculture.
Right.
So that was, I've again sort of going back to this idea of an alternative history. That to me was a part of history that I hadn't seen connected. That was really
Yeah.
was another
Yeah.
bridge between the Beats and the hippies and really influential people connecting. Allen Ginsberg was kind of like the Forrest Gump, of the
Mhm.
counterculture. Like he would always be at the thing that was really happening. He was at like the first acid test where the Grateful Dead played. He was at Harvard with Leary. You know what I mean? He was in
Right.
India at the right time. He was with the Beatles. He was, wherever the energy was, Ginsberg was there for, whatever reason, whether he brought it, he sensed it, it came together. But he's a really interesting figure to just track throughout time because he was so connected to these different activities that were very influential to a lot of people.
It's so absolutely true. I was reminded of that again with the Rolling Thunder Review
Yep.
movie by Scorsese of Dylan, because I believe I'm remembering this correctly. I know that Allen Ginsberg is the last image that you see in that movie. I believe he might be the first too. He
Yep.
really is everywhere, and he was also such a networker. Even when he was down and depressed and a Jewish queer in the 1940s, who just like didn't know what to do. He was just terrified by the cultural pressures that were hitting him from every direction. Even so, he managed to make Kerouac, in a sense, Kerouac, because Kerouac was kind of a loner, and Kerouac didn't know how to sell himself in the same way that Ginsberg just found very natural. And so, yeah, let me just put that book up here. This is a fantastic book. I really commend you on it. I love this book, and I'm so glad you visited your friend at Stanford and ran into those letters.
And then to have City Lights, publish it was again,
Yeah,
talking about this network. And again, I say these things and I don't mean to, but this
yeah,
is how interwoven they are. Lawrence Ferlinghetti started City Lights. City
right.
Lights published that book. You know
Yep,
what I mean? So it's like I mentioned Ram Dass, and Ram Dass was at that time Richard Alpert, who was a part of Leary's experiments. I'm not even intentionally doing these things, but this is how the
yeah,
fabric is so tightly woven
yeah,
through
absolutely.
all these strands.
Yeah. Um, I think another thing that this book did, which I think was smart and very important, and was it started. I think it anticipated a kind of hallucinogen positivity that has come around, with, for instance, Michael Pollan's book, How to Change Your Mind. I think we talked about this briefly, and you said you'd read that book. And how would you talk about, the positive effects of something, that, in mainstream discourse is not like, you're not supposed to be talking about, the positive effects of, quote, drugs, but that's a kind of fake category too. Not all drugs are the same, and hallucinogens, in the Pollan book, he talks about their therapeutic effects, and also, a long-standing interest in opening up consciousness and understanding consciousness.
Right. Yeah, and it's interesting. There is.
Hello. This is the guy running the technology.
Yeah.
This is a Tennessee Tech University event, and we do not endorse the use of Schedule whatever substances. But interestingly enough, the FDA has approved several clinical trials at very high level research institutions. But for your parents who might be watching with you students tonight, we just want to let you say that Tennessee Tech says, don't do drugs. I'll see you later.
Thank you, Andrew. Now, Peter?
And I will start this by saying I no longer do drugs. I've been sober for quite some years now. So I agree with this sentiment as well. It's the best way to operate your brain. But I will also say, it's interesting. There is like a renaissance in psychedelic experiments, and I think some of it came out of soldiers returning from the Middle East and from Iraq with PTSD, and they started to do more testing on that. There's also been quite a bit of testing in people dealing with end of life and sort of coming to terms with that. So it's being used in really specific ways and under very, by very smart people under very controlled situations. And I think what's a shame is that for so long that wasn't happening. And the other shame is that even the people who are doing that now have to be real careful about presenting it and talking about it. And in some ways don't want it to really be widely discussed for fear of, drawing too much attention. But again, these are really smart people who are trying to do really positive things with these drugs. And it is possible. But, just like with any drug, it has to be handled correctly. It has to be, given correctly. And that was a real, there was a real difference even between Timothy Leary's early experimenting with LSD and where it went. He went from somebody who was very much looking at it through therapeutic lenses and how it can help with all these different things. And then by the end, it was like, everybody turn on, tune in, drop out. So it turned into this sort of like everybody, take acid thing for a while, but that's not how it started. And so I do think there's some really, really interesting work being done now that's worth paying attention to. And Michael Pollan's book is fantastic. And he talks about not only what's going on now, but also his own personal experience, of trying these things therapeutically, which he had never done before. And the guy is brilliant, so it's worth reading. It's a great book just to read anyway.
A couple of years ago, Peter, Tennessee Tech did get a grant to study marijuana, and then they decided against it for some reason. But are you familiar with the work of Stanislav Grof?
Sure.
So it's kind of like yogic breathing or like exercise breathing, but amplified. But he's able to use a completely non-pharmacological methodology, as Ted was saying earlier, to invite these things that are already happening inside you to just occur. Yeah. And I'm wearing my tie-dye just to fully, own this evening. But I think that, I just wrote a paper on psychedelic sobriety. And so I think it is a thing to talk about the way the brain works. And as a cultural phenomenon, it would be academically dishonest to talk about the Grateful Dead without talking about this. And being as that you're a scholar of the dead, I invite what you were saying. And I was being sort of sprite-like and interrupting your vibes, but I just felt on behalf of Center Stage, which is the funding source for this event, that I thought I should just put in a little silly disclaimer on behalf of our funding source. So.
Yeah, no, I don't think it's, you know, I mean, you know, you have to be careful in the way that you treat these things and the way you talk about them. We're talking about powerful substances that aren't treated as powerful substances a lot of time. And people, you know, things can get out of control, and they can be really useful under certain circumstances. But there's a really great story. I'll sort of dip back into Ram Dass real quickly. There's a really great story of when he first went to India and he met his guru, who was named Neem Karoli Baba. And at that time, he was still Richard Alpert, and he had all this LSD with him. And so his guru, who, you know, didn't speak English, but sort of got through to him to say, do you have some of the yogi medicine? And Ram Dass, you know, yeah, I do. He said, well, give me some. So he took, you know, this copious amounts of LSD that Ram Dass at that time, Richard Alpert, had. And he sort of like sat there and, you know, Alpert was thinking like, oh my God, I'm going to turn this saint, you know, this guru crazy by giving him so much acid. And after a certain point, it became clear that this stuff had no effect on his guru. And in fact, he sort of played with Ram Dass a little and would like make a face like he was going crazy. And then he would, you know, sort of come back to it. And finally he said, you know, yogis have been experimenting with these things for thousands of years. This is nothing new to us. He said, the problem is these drugs can open the door that lets you get in to visit with God, but they don't let you stay there. So the key is, can you get to that place through natural means in a way that allows you to stay in communion with whatever that thing is that you were looking for? And that's, you know, that's ultimately an interesting sort of diversion that Ram Dass and Timothy Leary, who started out as partners, went in two different directions. And that very much became much more Ram Dass's direction, which was much more interesting to me as a figure. And somebody who sort of went through that and came out to a place of going like, yeah, I'd like to feel like that, you know, without being hungover or being whatever, you know, the other things, without being arrested, you know, whatever it might be. So no, but it's all, you know, it's interesting stuff, and it's worth looking at all of it, you know. It's and this is the history of humankind, by the way, too. This isn't the 60s. You know, this has been going on as long as people have been walking the earth.
Let me bring it back around to the Grateful Dead as well, you know, because one of the things that Michael Pollan observes over and over again in the different experiments that people have had with these substances, and indeed with his own experiences, you know, that are in a controlled environment, is that the direction that the mind goes is away from self and towards a kind of allness, you know, and away from self-interest, you know, to kind of a general benefit. And in a certain sense, you know, I don't think you can think of a rock and roll band that has more of that kind of spirit than the Grateful Dead. You know, the whole idea of permitting recordings in its shows, you know, the whole collective kind of environment of their message, as it were, you know, and the fact that so much of the experience of them is the concert scene rather than the recorded album. You know, the Beatles famously went the other way. They couldn't stand the sort of the live shows. They felt no one was really hearing the music, you know, and so like just went into the studio, you know, and they're the greatest band ever, supposedly. You know, I'm no slag on the Beatles, but like it's interesting that the Dead went completely the other way, you know, away from, as it were, selfhood and like getting their perfect, you know, artistic moment and toward sharing and collectivity.
Yeah. You know, make no mistake, the Dead would have been the Beatles if they could have. You know, like,
fair enough.
They would have loved to. They couldn't do it. You know, I mean, just like so many other, you know, musicians of that era, seeing the Beatles on the Ed Sullivan Show, you know, like sort of was a big catalyst, you know, for them to want to go electric. And they had actually been playing as a jug band, you know, before that, quite literally like a jug band. So, and bluegrass was a huge thing. But yeah, I mean, there is undoubtedly, like, it is a part of that culture, you know, that idea of like, and I think, you know, the tapes and everything like that, they were traded freely, but they also did become a sort of currency. And that's when you sort of get into the interesting, like, anthropological side of Grateful Dead society, because just like any subculture, you know, you have currencies and you have sort of status things and you have different rituals and ways that things are done. And it's a really, you know, again, you say, like, why do people get fascinated with this band? Here's another way in. You know, you look at it through this sort of, you know, I guess maybe a sociological lens would be a way to sort of word it. But, you know, and there's all these things there that are quite fascinating. And that's something that I talk about in Cornell 77. It's like, why did this show become so famous? You know, it's some show that they played in upstate New York in May in 1977 that the Dead don't even remember themselves playing, you know, really. But it's because, you know, all these different reasons, one of them being that there was a really good recording of this show that got traded around, and it was one of the better sounding recordings out there. And, you know, also a phenomenal show, and they played really well and all this stuff. But, you know, it had this, it was great to have, but it was also traded more frequently. You know what I mean? So it was a currency that was in heavy circulation, let's say. So yeah, that's one of the parts, one of the aspects of the Grateful Dead that's fascinating to me.
And I know we're going to get to your reading from that in a moment. I just want to make the observation, because I hadn't really listened to the Grateful Dead in a long time, and certainly I hadn't listened to the live stuff. And I really had my eyes opened to what a phenomenal guitarist Jerry Garcia is. He just sounds so clean and beautiful, you know, and able to kind of go into different vocabularies of the guitar, you know, a sweet mellow sound, or a kind of down in the blues, you know, kind of sound. Yeah, wow, you know, I was really impressed by that, among other things.
Yeah, no, he's a very much a singular musician. I mean, people can say, you know, they can like him, they can hate him, whatever, but he was truly an original. And you have to give him that. And I'm not going to remember it. There's a really great quote, but it's worth looking at what Bob Dylan said about Jerry Garcia when he passed away, because Bob Dylan isn't like tossing out praise to people left and right? And that's not really him. I thought what he wrote about Jerry Garcia when he died was really eloquent and really touching and really apt too. So it's worth looking that up.
Could you please read for us from that book?
I will. Yes, I'll read a little bit from that. Okay. So what I'm going to read is the
Andrew,
little
he
introduction.
can take you off the screen now. I'm saying to Andrew, he can take me off the screen now.
So what I'm going to read is, this is the introduction to the first set. And basically what I did with this book, this, I should say a little bit about it. This book was proposed to me as an idea. This actually wasn't an idea that I came up with. I was approached by the publisher and the editor at Cornell University Press about, you know, would I be interested in writing a book about this famous show that had happened on their campus? And my first thought was that it was a crazy, you know, thing to do. Why? I mean, it was a great show. I knew all about it. But why would anybody write a whole book about a single show? And how can you write a whole book about a single show? And so I first sort of declined. And then I think the artistic puzzle of it got the better of me. And I really got curious of how do you write a whole book about a single show? So I don't actually start talking about the show itself so much until around the middle of the book. And this is, I talk about different people who went to the show and what was going on, and the Grateful Dead at that time in the 70s, and where they fit into the music scene and what was going on culturally. But this is the introduction to the actual first set. If you were a Deadhead fortunate enough to be inside Barton Hall when the concert started on May 8th, 1977, and not one of the unlucky few stranded in the swirling snow outside, you may have found yourself speculating what song the band was going to play next. Sometimes on nights like this, they busted out a raucous Cold Rain and Snow to bring the audience together by acknowledging, through their music, the weather everyone was dealing with around the show. Bertha was unlikely, as the band had unleashed a ripping version in Boston the previous night. They had also waved that flag wide and high, encoring with U.S. Blues on May 7th, 1977, as Jerry soldiered through guitar problems at the end of the show. Then again, with the Dead, you never knew. Listening to recordings of Cornell 77, it is almost possible to feel the giddy waves of anticipation that undulated through the crowd when the house lights dimmed and the band took the stage in the cavernous barn of a building. Whether they had driven 6 hours straight to Ithaca after skipping merrily out of Boston Garden, or it had been several months or even years since their last show, Deadheads knew the thrills that awaited them, and newcomers were easily swept up in the torrent of their excitement. Perhaps, oddly enough, concertgoers gave fleeting thoughts to their mothers as whoops and catcalls echoed through Barton Hall. It was Mother's Day, after all. Maybe some moms would even get a phone call after the show. Depending on how the night went, however, some mothers might wait until the following morning to get that phone call, or even the late afternoon. Jerry sported his trademark black t-shirt, and Donna Jean was dressed more like a William Smith Madrigal singer than a seasoned rock star. Bob's beard was as thick as Jerry's, but Bob still looked young enough to be the lead guitarist's kid brother, which was psychically true, if not biologically accurate. Inside the hall, guitars were tuned and the crowd clapped rhythmically, signaling that it was time to strap in for the long, strange haul. The show was about to begin. Then the music hit. Wait, what was that? New Minglewood Blues? They must not have dug deep enough into it at Boston Garden, because there it was again, sure enough, with Jerry flying across his fretboard, sending out a flurry of notes urging Bob forward into the rapscallion's origin story. Outside in the rain and snow, fans surged toward the doors as they strained to hear the muted thump of Phil's bass on the first set opener. Inside the hall, the dance party was underway. The hopeful fan who can be heard on audience recordings calling out for America's favorite song, Truckin', did not get his wish on May 8, 1977, but many other Deadheads in attendance did have their set list wishes fulfilled. For some, the show illustrates the astonishing musical range available at the band's fingertips. Cowboy songs, dance songs, tearjerkers, love songs, anthems, and raving rockers all follow one another with that inimitable Grateful Dead seamlessness. To others, the Cornell show will never deserve its oft-debated status of best ever, owing to omissions from the set list. As one example, because band and fans alike agree that Dark Star was a vehicle for the group's most inspired, artistic, evocative, and frankly, Grateful Dead-like playing, many argue that a show with no Dark Star could never be considered for the title of best ever. No ifs, ands, or buts. No Dark Star, no dice. But as the saying goes, and as the Dead seem to twistedly reference in their song U.S. Blues, there's more than one way to skin a cat, or a goat, as it were. For many young East Coast fans in attendance at Cornell, hearing a live St. Stephen would truly be a dream come true. The crowd would have to wait until the second set to hear the first notes of St. Stephen, but it was hovering on the horizon. Some of the fun of Dead shows was anticipating a favorite or seldom heard tune, or guessing what would be played based on the set lists of other shows on the tour. But above all, being at a Dead show was about being in the moment. And the moment that evening at Barton Hall began with a band shooting their way into New Minglewood Blues like tragic heroes in a Clint Eastwood spaghetti western. It initiated a night of music that, while it might not have evolved out of some people's ideal set list, featured a depth and breadth of material that underscores the deep-reaching roots of the Grateful Dead's rich musical and storytelling influences. So there's a little from Cornell 77, which is worth a listen, loudly. You there, Ted?
Green, but here I am.
Right.
Peter, this has been a wonderful evening. We're past an hour now. I think that was like what we understood we were going to do. But at the same time, I am curious to hear your new work. You know, I know you've written a new book of prose poems, and might you share a little bit of that to take us out?
Sure, yeah. Do you want to, should I do this and then you're going to come back and we'll say goodbye, or do you want me to just?
Sure, that sounds
Okay.
good.
All right. Okay. This will be a little different vibe here. So, as Ted mentioned, I have a book of prose poems that's coming out in spring 2022, next spring. And it was very much inspired by COVID and lockdown and all the things we've been experiencing. And it is called Beyond the Edge of Suffering. So I'm going to read two poems here that are, as the titles, you know what, I'm going to read one. I'll read one from COVID and I'll read a different one. This one is called Welcome to the Last Day of America. Welcome to the last day of America. Don't be shy. There are plenty of seats up front. It is duller than what we expected, but there are party balloons and red hats, so shut up and enjoy. Believe in the white old days. We'll get back there. Clear the decks, fill the prisons, pile silver trays with towers of greasy wrapped hamburgers, and build walls higher than any 10,000 children could scale. Break the children. Break them. Break the mountains, break the sky. It has been spoken that every creeping thing that creepeth is thine dominion, America, so fuck it up real good. The future is yours, more or less. Not necessarily yours per se, but did we mention the balloons? Once inside, the line forms on the left until you reach the front, at which point it switches to the left constantly. We regret to inform you that our capacity has been reached. You don't have to go home, but you can't stay here. Don't worry. Our capacity may be low, but our light shines brighter than ever, blah, blah. Here, have some tokens. If you don't mind a little friendly advice, never trust the hand that bites you. Once retracted, it will do it again. I mean, it's not as if you didn't see it coming, America. The orange fox was in the hen house, but you only stared dumbly. You did nothing. Now bend over and kiss your purple fruited asses goodbye. And then I will read one that is not directly COVID. This is from a little bit earlier, but this will be the last one I'll read tonight. It's called In Defense of Insubordination. It happened again. You've been accused of insubordination. It's a recurring theme in your life, and you will never outgrow it. There will never be a time when you are not driven to acts of insubordination. You have a history, as they say. There is a track record. You only have yourself to blame. Your attitude has kept you in a position of subservience, and every so often you will be reminded of that by someone who really knows how to dress. You will both sense that you have a general disregard for authority. It will go without saying that you have a bad attitude. You will be in that position because you don't follow the rules. The laughable part, you will not be in on the joke, is that you may not even know how to go about learning the rules and then figuring out how to negotiate them towards some future goal. No one is interested in having you in a position of leadership anyway. A top-down management system based on insubordination would be doomed to failure for you and for whatever ill-fated venture you stumble into. The truth is that leadership would simply mean working that much harder to find people with whom to exercise your natural impulse toward insubordination. Which isn't to say there wouldn't always be someone above you. There would be. You would recognize them when they inevitably accuse you of insubordination. But with success, those people are harder to find. And once they invite you to play golf, you may even feel bad telling them to go fuck themselves. It happens. Your best attempts at remaining insubordinate can be subverted by a well-made Arnold Palmer in casual conversation. That's why it's best for you not to speak to anyone who may someday place you in a position of authority. It will ultimately be more trouble for you than it's worth. It's also inconsiderate to dupe authority figures into trusting you unless you truly plan on making that next step toward middle management and beyond. They are so innocent, these leaders working in defense of the natural order. They deserve better than duplicity. They deserve better than you. All right, that's it for the poetry segment.
Thank you so much, Peter, you poet of insubordination. Yeah.
It was great talking to you, Todd. Thank you for having me here. I really appreciate it. It was a lot of fun.
It's been wonderful, and a full vision of America from a bunch of different alternative angles. I really enjoyed it. I really enjoyed talking to you and visiting with you again. I'm sorry we're not doing this in person, but we will sometime in the future, I'm sure.
Absolutely.
We won't be here forever.
So there weren't any questions on the live stream page, but people out there, if this is your first time visiting Tennessee Tech Center stage, please follow the page, because you'll be invited to many other cool events, both in Cookeville, but also live streaming now that we're all doing pandemic live streams. And so even though, Peter, we're so far apart, I feel so close together. So were you a dancer or not? Did you ever dance at the shows?
Oh yeah, I still do.
What are some of your favorite jams to dance to? Dead jams.
Oh gosh, I mean, like the Music Never Stopped is always a fun one, like Iko, all the upbeat Sugar Magnolia. I mean, it goes on, and there's different kinds of dancing in Dead World, of course.
I mean, I like a good Scarlet Fire, a good China Rider. And I never go to the bathroom during space. I love space. I don't care what anybody else says. I'm all about the space.
There you go.
And I'm a spinner. So next time I see Ted says the three of us should hit a show when all this is over. So I'll see you on tour.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Andrew. Thank you, Todd.
Absolutely.
Everybody have a great night.